listening to Two Babies in a Business, a podcast about business, marketing, growth strategy, staff clients, babies and marriage. I'm Christina. This is Peter. We're founders and leaders of CIPR Communications, and we are continuing our chat about public relations. What?
Nothing.
I feel like sharing a story.
Okay.
Okay, so I think a lot of people, especially when I think about like those that have been doing digital marketing and marketing for a long time, so we're like a supplier for WSI in public relations, obviously. And I think a lot of the conversations we've been having lately are like, oh, I've never done public relations before. What does that mean? And how do I tackle this? And how do I pitch it to my boss? And I'm nervous about it. And what is this going to be? And whatever. And then you start throwing tactics at them. So, and by you, I mean us. So we're going to talk about that as a part of the strategy. Like, oh, like, have you ever written a letter to your government officials, or have you ever like tried to win an award, or have you ever like press release something, or, you know, on social media, have you ever made posts about your team members or different content plays? And I think initially a lot of people are nervous about that, right? Like, I think, you know, there's a certain element of public relations that's a bit like braggy. And,
definitely.
And putting yourself out there in a new way. And I think about, you know, Kaylin has me doing these reels for CIPR, which are definitely a bit out of my comfort zone, but they're definitely on trend. And I've been able to tell some interesting stories about my life as like a mom and a female business owner or whatever that, you know, are different ways to deliver. And I feel like you often tell me this, so it will be of no surprise to most people that like I don't like to try new things. I definitely, in those surveys where it's like, are you the first to try something new? It's like, no, I'm not. We have a kid, one of our boys is very much like his mom. So we like brought the kids yesterday to a new after school activity because of COVID regulations. We're not allowed to stick around. So it's very much like you got to drop them off and see you in an hour and you'll be okay. And, you know, you pick them up and like, they both loved it, but he loved it.
Yeah.
Like he told me after, like, I'm the best in the class, Mom. I'm the best one in the class.
He also loves being the best at everything he does.
Which is also similar to his mother. But anyways, I like liken that to public relations though, because I think every time we have told a client about it, I'm thinking of one client in particular right now who's never done government outreach before. Brad has them on a pretty, I would say, robust government outreach communications program right now. And they like can't get enough of it. Like they were like, oh, well, no one's going to care about this. Like they don't care what we're doing. And now they're like, we can't get enough. I have an email sitting in my inbox like, okay, how are we going to schedule all these things? And we're going to have all these conversations and let's make some decks and it's great. And so I guess my story in a roundabout way is just try it. You'll like it. Like it's a way to spice things up. And again, being someone who I know I like to like stay in the coloring lines and not go out, and public relations really can open doors for someone who has been potentially stuck doing the same tactics over and over again. And you know, we've talked a lot about businesses wanting to grow on this podcast, and I think public relations is an interesting way to try something new in your business with, you know, potentially some really great short-term wins, but for sure some really excellent long-term gains as well.
Yeah. And I think it's important though, I guess there's some managing of expectations that needs to happen because like, you know, similar to marketing, I guess, but like certainly in PR, it's like one-off efforts rarely lead to any kind of results. You need to do PR over time to see meaningful results from it. And then, you know, similar to marketing is like once you kind of get to that place where you're doing consistent PR, you really start to see more consistent results from it. And to give you an example, a few of our clients that we've been doing PR for this past year, they've since kind of stopped because of various things happening in their business, and it was the right time to kind of put a pause on things. But like, I still get calls from people that find their press release on Google or whatever, um, you know asking for all kinds of things. And I'll give you an example is like Steel River Group, which is a company we haven't sort of done any formal press releases for a little while. I get calls because my name's on the press release as the media contact, from people looking for jobs all the time, as an example, right? And it's a great example of like, they didn't do PR looking for employees, but people like what they see in terms of the image they put out online. They're an Indigenous owned company. Most of the people that call me are Indigenous folks looking for work and wanting to work for an Indigenous company. So there's a great alignment there, and it's a great fit, and it works, right? And so, I mean, like, I just send them to, and I've let Steel River Group know about that, and that I get these calls, and they said, that's fantastic. Like, here's a spot on our website you can send them to that show all of our current jobs that we're hiring for or whatever, right? So again, it's one of those things that it's like, that, and in addition to that, I mean, we can see the stats on their website in terms of like website traffic every time we do PR. And what's interesting about PR, and there's a lot of debate about, this gets a little technical and complicated, but when you put something out over a press release over a wire, technically there's a lot of people that in the marketing world that say that PR doesn't necessarily give you marketing juice. So doesn't help you rank better on Google and things like that. I disagree with that actually statement, and I've seen evidence to the contrary. And Steel River Group is another good example. Is their authority of their website has increased despite the fact that they don't do any digital marketing; they only do PR. So that tells me that PR actually has marketing juice when it comes to traditional digital marketing services. And so there's all these other benefits you get that are not necessarily the exact thing you were trying to get a benefit from, even though you get those benefits too. So if you do it consistently over time, it's sort of a growing number of benefits you get from it.
So, I mean, good segue to building a public relations strategy, because I think our experience over dealing with public relations, I think in our careers before CIPR, but also with different clients is, especially today, it is rare that a one-off thing is really going to get you noticed. So a one-off press release or one post that's an announcement about something, or one letter to someone, it really is about that. How are you continuing to flow? So similar to your marketing, great, you did a blog with some keywords. You need to do more. You need to keep it consistent for the next 6 to 12 months. And I think, if you have, if you're one of our clients from a retainer perspective, one of the first things we do on the public relations side is actually build a 12-month public relations calendar. And what that calendar is, it's really a strategy. And it looks at everything. It looks at, who are the important audiences we're going to try to reach? What are the important topics that you want to talk about? What are the potential ties to interesting things happening? So, I mean, in 2021, obviously there's an interesting tie to most things about COVID, whether that's something positive like business pivots and like comes out of COVID an absolute rock star, or the opposite, business needs communities' help to survive during COVID. There's always a issue of the day that a company can find to pitch and to slant to. And then I think the other piece of that public relations strategy or calendar is really that timelined approach of how often am I going to do things? Is it monthly or quarterly? Is this something that happens once a year? Is it not? And I think that the piece that I always really try to stress to clients, but also our team, is what are the goals of your public relations plan? I go back to like our love for the tourism industry and our love for working with destination marketing organizations. I mean, our public relations efforts with them and those clients are about building the value of tourism, building a community of champions. And I think that most communications professionals in those tourism organizations go, oh, this is public relations.
Right.
You're like, yeah, you're like firing up the public and getting them excited about something.
Right. You're letting them know that the tourism industry creates jobs and creates
Yeah,
GDP and economy and is the reason their quality of life is what it is, right? Like these are exactly, it's a great example.
it's true. And so, when we approach that, it's like, okay, well, what is the goal? And so, value of tourism aside, or any of those things, like, what is the goal? Well, my goal is to tell the public that tourism is really important. And maybe there's another goal of my goal is to build a list of 10,000 people that when we have a referendum on an arts center, I know I have 10,000 people I can email that'll be excited about building an arts center. So, I mean, public relations, and sometimes it's like, hey, I want people to know our name. We have one client in the mix right now that, has, I would say, has had a very humble, 30-year history, but nobody could tell you what their name is. And so now they are in a place with new leadership that's like, we want to tell people our name. And hey, that's a goal. You want more people to know your name. And so I would say, if you're listening, what are your public relations goals? If you're in tourism or that space, then maybe, yeah, it's about demonstrating why tourism is important to the public. So it's not about your consumer facing traveler. They know about you, or your marketing efforts will help them know about you. It's about that public piece. Or if you are, like this other client, if you're a business owner and you're doing interesting things, it's about potentially getting your name out there. Or maybe it's about investment. Maybe you want to trigger some interest from some community leaders, and right. So it's like really boiling down, try to take your marketing hat and your marketing lens off and go, okay, what am I trying to achieve from that public perception, public awareness perspective? Is it about my brand? Is it about what my brand brings? Is it about my industry? What is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then in addition to that, obviously it's like, then how do we actually achieve those goals, right? And outside of just straight tactics, what is our tone? Right? How do we talk about ourselves? What are our key messages, right? Like, what are the main, what's your elevator pitch, for lack of better terms, right? Those are the types of things that you want to see in your PR strategy, and then into your tactical plan, right? And another, I always like to too about what I like to kind of let people know is that, like, a lot of companies are doing PR whether they think so or not. And I know we've mentioned a couple of examples in the last episode, but like social media, organic social media to me is a form of PR. It's about creating a community online. So same concepts apply, right? But then, obviously there are some other tactics as well, like media relations and stakeholder and employee relations and those types of things, right?
Yeah, when we talk about tone, I mean something that we, again, borrowing from our tourism-based public relations campaigns, we often talk about education or empowerment. And so, do you have a cause? Do you need people to do something? Is it you need people to save your store, or you need people to stand up and say this is wrong? Or do you need people to say, yes, this is right? There's a tone of empowerment, and you need action items, and you need, okay, I'm writing a letter to the government. I need these 5 things. And then there's this kind of tone of education. Are you coming at it where you don't think anybody even knows about you? So what are the things you need to educate them on? And what I will always tell people is you need to educate before you can empower them, right? If people aren't really understanding why something is important, then you've lost them. I think about a couple of years ago, Caliber Environmental EcoCoat Paint was a client of ours, and we helped them significantly with PR. And one of the big things for them was brand awareness. And this really started as an education campaign around, like, what is EcoCoat? Why is it important? And basically it's paint made out of other paint. It's, when you have half a tin of paint left, it goes to Caliber Environmental. they do what they need to do, and it becomes new paint that you can then buy and paint with. So
Mhm.
there's this whole education process and plan that involved social media, government letters, awards that had to do with educating people around this brand. So even I remember the series of posts was like the 6 steps of creating EcoCoat. And it was like, step 1 was a guy painting and he had leftover paint and then he brought it to the recycling. And then EcoCoat went and, you learned all the things they did in order to do these, great new colors and whatever. And that's when people started getting interested, right? That's when government officials went, oh, like you're the only people doing this? That's really interesting. Why haven't I heard about you before? Can I come for a tour?
Mhm.
I don't even remember how many politicians we brought through there just to learn about the process because they were interested. And that resulted in them posting on social media and sharing pictures. And that resulted in, other opportunities and whatever. And, then came the questions of, oh, like, well, what happens to all the paint cans? And now all of
Mhm.
a sudden, from a public relations perspective, there's this really interesting story about how many, I don't know,
It was lots. It was a
how
lot.
many pounds of
Tons. It was how many
metal
tons?
was
Yeah.
recycled because of these tins, or how many,
Yeah.
the media story became about how many gallons of paint have been recycled and made new. It was something crazy, like I don't remember.
It was
Anyway,
crazy numbers. Yeah. Yeah.
but it's like all of those things. And had we not started with an education campaign, the empowerment campaign would have fallen completely flat. And that
Mhm.
empowerment campaign was around things like, you know, ensure that like anywhere you bring recycled paint, make sure that they're bringing it to these guys. Or I think there were some around like ask your elected officials to like use this recycled paint in their offices.
Right.
Or there was a bunch of nonprofits that we also involved, like we're going to donate all this paint to this nonprofit, and you need to encourage your favorite nonprofits to come and do the same because this is
Mhm.
right for the environment. And if your public relations strategy as you're building it needs to start from that place of how do I educate people about my story and why I'm important.
Yeah. Yeah, and often, and it just depends on the brand and on the situation. Sometimes that could even start with things like polling and understanding kind of how people perceive your brand, right? So, I mean, there's a bit of research that can go. Again, it depends on the situation. If you're a brand new company, and obviously polling is not going to help you. But in tourism, as an example, we do a lot of polling as a starting point. And back to the value of tourism kind of example, it's like we build a strategy because we've done some polling and we understand where your weaknesses are. And so, to give an example, it's, people in a lot of the places we've done polling thought tourism was a good industry, thought it was important, thought it contributed to the local economy, thought it created good jobs, all of those polling numbers super high. But then, did they know the role their destination marketing organization played? No, not really. Did they understand like
Funding
the way that
models,
the industry, sorry,
the funding model,
the funding models and the way the industry worked from that perspective? No, not really. And so it's like, okay, so that now it became very clear on where the education needed to happen. And so, back to value of tourism, it's like, and goals and market and PR strategy, it's like, the strategy was, hey, we want to make sure that politicians understand how this industry works and what the role of the DMO is, because we want to be able to preserve funding for
yeah,
what we're doing, right? And that's a very important goal. Like, these organizations don't exist without that funding. And so now we know exactly where the education needs to happen, what the education needs to be, and the whole strategy can then be based on that data and that input, right?
totally. Yeah, so strategy. Think about your goals first. What are you trying to do? Think about the education that needs to happen, and then think about how you're going to pivot that education to empowerment. And I think the big thing there from you is like the research side. What are the things you don't know that you need to know? So is there polling that needs to be done? Is there interviews that need to happen? Do you need to do even, back to university days, a literature review of what's out there? What's the research that needs to be committed into the public relations campaign? And then what are the tactics? And And tactics are far and wide. I think media is an important one. We're going to be talking lots about media, but earned and paid. Awards. I think people often forget about awards being part of that public relations strategy, but if there's a great award and your team can be recognized for something awesome, of course, chase it. Caliber is a great example of that. They won some really awesome awards that got them some good attention from an environmental perspective. Government, who needs to know about you? And this isn't government relations as in lobbying. This is government relations for educating and empowering your elected officials to know more about you. And then the stakeholder, kind of the being a good neighbor piece, and letting people know around you what's going on. And there's a number of things that can happen in there, whether, to your point, it's social media posts or a sign outside like we talked about in the last episode. But yeah, I feel like that's how I would tackle the public relations piece, and then assign some timelines. Like, are you going to do all of these things every quarter? Do you have the capacity to do it every month? And how are you measuring?
Well, and measurement, exactly. And back to polling is measurement, maybe you start maybe with a poll, understand kind of how people perceive things. And then over time, maybe you do another poll to see how you've moved the needle, various ways to accomplish that. But
there you go. So go build your public relations plan. So if you like the podcast, remember you can follow us on Spreaker and Spotify and iTunes. And remember to leave us some comments on our Instagram and our Facebook accounts. Let us know what you're doing for public relations in your company.
3, 2, 1.